The terminal clock ticked past midnight when the loudspeaker crackled and announced the delay for the third time, and something inside her finally gave way. Not anger, not panic, just a quiet exhaustion that settled deep in her chest. She exhaled slowly, staring at the polished airport floor like it might offer answers. Before we go any further, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and how old are you? Because I want you to imagine being right there with her, stuck between destinations, wondering if life is done surprising you. And here's the real question I want you thinking about. What if the moment that changes everything comes when you're no longer looking for it? Her name was Margaret Calloway, 64. Powerful in ways most people never noticed. She had built a financial empire from nothing, survived betrayals that would have broken most people, and learned how to smile through rooms full of people who wanted something from her. Tonight, none of that mattered. She was just another woman with a delayed flight and a heart that had grown tired of being careful. She had chosen a commercial flight on purpose, no assistance, no special treatment. She liked blending in, sitting among strangers who didn't know her net worth or her last name's weight. It made her feel human again. But as the minutes dragged into hours, that invisibility began to feel heavy. Around her, couples argued quietly, phones buzzed with impatience, and a group of businessmen laughed too loudly at jokes that weren't funny. Margaret moved toward a quieter gate, carrying her coat over one arm, heels dangling from her fingers. She slipped into a seat near a wide window where planes rested like tired animals under harsh white lights. That's when she noticed him. Not because he was loud or impressive, but because he wasn't trying to be seen at all. He sat alone, slightly hunched, hands folded over a cane that looked more symbolic than necessary. Early 70s, she guessed. His hair was silver but thick, his face calm in a way that suggested long practice. He wasn't scrolling or pacing or complaining. He was watching the world go by with gentle curiosity, like someone who understood that rushing never actually makes life move faster. Their eyes met briefly. He smiled first. Not a flirt, not a performance, just warmth. Margaret felt her shoulders relax before she even realized they'd been tense. If you were in her place, would you have smiled back? Or would you have looked away, afraid of starting something you didn't have the energy to finish? A few minutes later, an elderly man nearby dropped his boarding pass and struggled to bend down. Before anyone else reacted, the silver-haired stranger stood, steady and unhurried, and helped him without making a scene. He spoke softly, listened patiently, and waited until the man was settled before returning to his seat. Margaret watched, something stirring in her chest she hadn't felt in years. Respect. Not admiration, respect. She found herself turning toward him without planning to. She commented on how calm he seemed, despite the delay. He chuckled lightly and said delays didn't bother him anymore. "Life already taught me how little control we really have," he said. His voice was low, steady, comforting in a way that felt almost dangerous. His name was Samuel Hayes, 71. Retired civil engineer, widowed 8 years. He didn't overshare, but when he spoke, there was honesty in every word. He asked her questions and actually listened to the answers. Margaret told him she worked in investments. He nodded, uninterested in details. What he wanted to know was whether she liked mornings or evenings more, and why. Time softened around them. The airport noise faded into background hum. They talked about travel mishaps, favorite cities, regrets that never quite healed, and the strange loneliness that can come even when your life looks full from the outside. Margaret surprised herself by laughing freely, by admitting she was tired of being impressive, by feeling seen without having to explain herself. Then the boarding announcement echoed through the gate. Their shared bubble cracked. People stood, gathered bags. Life resumed its forward push. Margaret felt an unexpected tightness in her throat. She hadn't planned for this. She hadn't expected to care. Samuel rose slowly, adjusting his jacket. He smiled at her again, softer this time. "Looks like this is where we part," he said. Margaret opened her mouth to respond when an airline representative hurried over and spoke to him in a low voice. His expression changed, not alarm but concern. He nodded, thanked her, and turned back to Margaret. "They've reassigned my seat. Might not be leaving tonight after all." Margaret looked at the boarding line, then back at him. Her ticket still rested in her hand. Her heart was suddenly loud. And standing there between what was safe and what was possible, she had only seconds to decide. Margaret's feet stayed planted even as the boarding line shortened, her name already echoing in her head like a habit she'd followed for decades. Move forward. Stay on schedule. Don't hesitate. Yet her eyes were locked on Samuel, standing there with that quiet patience, as if time would wait if he asked it politely. She felt the familiar pull of logic tug at her, reminding her of responsibilities, meetings, plans stacked weeks ahead. And then she felt something else, softer but stronger, whispering that this moment would not come back. She surprised herself by stepping out of line. She didn't announce it. She just moved, heart thudding, until she stood beside him. Samuel raised his eyebrows slightly, not questioning, just acknowledging her choice. The airline agent finished explaining the mix-up and walked away. Silence hovered between them, full but not awkward. Margaret let out a breath she didn't realize she'd been holding and said, almost to herself, that she could take the next flight. Samuel studied her face, not with disbelief, but with care. "Are you sure?" he asked, not wanting to be the reason for regret. She nodded, feeling oddly steady. For the first time in years, she wasn't calculating outcomes. She was listening to herself. They walked together toward a quieter corner of the terminal, the kind with dimmer lights and closed coffee stands. They talked more deeply now, the way people do when the world thins out and honesty feels safer. Margaret spoke about loneliness without dressing it up, about how success had protected her from hardship, but not from emptiness. Samuel listened without trying to fix it. When he spoke, he talked about rebuilding life after loss, about learning that companionship isn't about replacing what was, but honoring it by continuing to live fully. If you were watching them, you might not have noticed anything dramatic. No grand gestures, no declarations, just two people choosing to be present. Sometimes that's where the real turning points hide. Hours later, dawn hinted faintly through the high windows. A new flight was scheduled. Samuel's seat was confirmed this time. Margaret felt that familiar tightening again, but it didn't scare her now. She reached into her bag, pulled out a simple card with her name and number, nothing more. She didn't explain who she was. She didn't offer assurances. She handed it to him and said she'd like to see him again if he felt the same. Samuel looked at the card for a moment, then at her. "I'd like that," he said. No hesitation, no disbelief, just truth. They parted with a hug that lingered a second longer than polite, shorter than desperate. As Margaret watched him walk away, she realized something subtle but profound had shifted. She wasn't clinging to the outcome. She was grateful for the courage it took to choose differently, even if this was all it ever was. Days passed. Then weeks. Samuel called. They met for coffee, then long walks, then quiet dinners where conversation flowed without effort. Margaret eventually told him the truth about her wealth, not as a confession, but as information. She braced herself for the change she'd seen so many times before. It never came. Samuel listened, nodded, and asked how that responsibility felt on her shoulders. He didn't ask for details. He didn't change the way he looked at her. Later, when she asked him why, he said something that stayed with her forever. "I didn't meet your money in that airport," he said. "I met you." Love didn't rush them. It unfolded. They learned each other's rhythms, boundaries, fears. Margaret learned how good it felt to be chosen without conditions. Samuel learned that it was safe to open his heart again, even after loss. Together, they built something grounded not in rescue or dependency, but in mutual respect. Months later, standing in that same airport, this time hand in hand, Margaret watched the departure board flicker with delays and smiled. She knew now that life doesn't always change with loud moments. Sometimes it shifts quietly when you decide to stay instead of go. If this story moved you, take a moment to like the video, share it with someone who believes it might be too late for love, and leave a comment telling me what part stayed with you. And if you want more stories like this, full of real emotion and second chances, make sure you subscribe. Because sometimes the delay isn't the problem, it's the gift.